Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry I couldn't be here today. I had to do a quick COVID test. I had a sore throat over the weekend, and before I could return, I had to do a COVID test. I did that at school today. It's a negative, so I'll be back tomorrow. So thanks for kind of working on this independently. So our topic is still criterion constraints. You'll have a copy of this presentation where you can fill in the last slides and list the criterion constraints for some common objects. So I'll kind of walk you through those two terms again. They are easy to confuse. So as we talk about criterion constraints, remember criteria are what we call are is something you can use to rank designs, and they are measurable. So things like battery life, actual cost. Constraints are kind of features that they must have or they can have. So features or must have items. So when you think about constraints, constraints are either yes, you met them, or no. Criteria typically have a range of values. And so, again, a classic criteria would be the cost. So, the cost of a final design is going to be a criteria. Another design that solves the problem may cost less, and in some ways, it could be a better solution, right? Uh, a constraint would be, again, something like, is it waterproof, right? So if you make the constraint that the product has to be waterproof, then uh, it's a yes or no. Did you make your the smartphone waterproof? If it is, great. Did you make the earbuds waterproof? If it did, then you met the constraint. Another one could be something like the maximum cost that you can't exceed. If you set a budget for your item of say $50, you couldn't have designs that were over $50. You could have designs that were under $50, but not over. So those are your two quick terms, criteria and constraints. And so again, what are constraints? And again, your constraints are things that must be met. So the project criteria, project features that must be met. So they're requirements or limitations. They're things you have to do or things that you cannot do. And so we can kind of share some of those. And again, they're typically yes or no. So an example of a thing you could not do is, let's say you have to make the size of the device, 6 inches. Like it may be there's a have to into it. So, and that's an example of constraints. So typical constraints, you'll have a maximum cost. And so typically you'll have a budget, which is your max cost. You typically have a timeline. So it has to be, you have to have it ready by, ready in 6 months. That you have to use specific materials. So it has to be made out of plastic, made out of metal, has to have a glass screen. And then we talked about specific characteristics like a specific size. And typically that could be a max size like 6 inches, or it could be some characteristic. Oop, I just dropped my pen. Like it's waterproof. Hold on one second. Okay. So those are your constraints again. And again, constraints are yes or no, and they're must haves. Ah, so what were the constraints for the paper towel activity? So this was something that we've kind of did together. We didn't really use this word, but it is an appropriate word. So constraints for that one were you were only allowed one sheet of paper. So that was a constraint. You weren't allowed adhesives. This was things you could not use. And then there was the constraint that to be measured, you had to be freestanding for at least 5 seconds. So I think these were criteria for the first part of that activity. And then criteria are these are measurable features. So they're not really yes or no. So they're measurable features. These would be things like so they're design features that are measurable and are used to rank and select the best design. So, and again, they usually have a range of values. And so examples of this, do I have examples here? Examples of this could be the actual cost, the battery life, something like the screen, brightness. So all of your designs are going to have a cost, have a battery life, have a screen brightness if you're talking about a smartphone, but the best design may somehow measure in those measurables have the best rankings. And so examples of criteria, again, you've seen the actual cost as opposed to the maximum cost as a criteria. Uh, Again, it might be that a size is a criteria that you want the biggest screen. You might want to have the least weight. So if you're, doing, laptops, you may want to have weight be a criteria that you want the lightest laptop. And again, something like durability, it's resistant to sand, it's waterproof. You have an aluminum case versus a plastic case, so things like this. So you could provide criteria, and again, each prospective design could be ranked. And we'll talk about that process too. But these are all examples of possible criteria for designs. And then for the paper tower activity, if I wanted to rank you guys in terms of who made the best design, we only had one criteria, and that design criteria was the height. So, assuming you met all the constraints, that you only used one sheet of paper, that you didn't use glue, and that it was freestanding for 5 seconds, if you met all the constraints, then the criteria for who made the best design is going to be the height. And so that's a quick example of that one. If this is still confusing, there's a short little 5-minute video on it. The last two slides kind of review those same two concepts again. And you can think of constraint like the rules for a game are absolute must. And then again, criteria are measurable features that rank design. So the next slides, 13 through 17, you're going to fill in. So in your Google Classroom, I posted this slide deck and then this video as a YouTube video. You can watch the video, and then obviously you're watching it now, and then you'll fill these ones in yourself. These are kind of unique answers, so we shouldn't have identical answers anywhere. You're welcome to work with a partner if you want to make that clear and kind of chat about things. It is easy to confuse constraints and criteria. And so just that's a common kind of, is that a constraint or a criteria? Why or why not? So we'll give you a couple examples, and then this will be due on Friday. We can talk about it in class too. So the first one is kind of a standard object in a classroom. It's a whiteboard marker. So we're looking at the Expo marker. So in terms of constraints, what would be some of the required features of a whiteboard marker? So if you're going to make a new whiteboard marker, what does it have to do? And then on the other side, how could we rank if we have 3 different whiteboard markers? What could we use to rank which whiteboard marker is the best? So what features could be used to figure out which whiteboard marker is, quote, the best marker? So again, just 3 each. You guys can fill that in. Again, if you want to work with somebody and just put a partner there, you can list it. Then you guys could share slides. But one partner is the most we're going to allow, and then everybody else, you should have individual kind of answers. There are lots of answers. The next one is kind of for your common smartphone. We've kind of used this example. If you want to, what are typical what does a smartphone have to do? Like if you walk into a cell phone store and they, hey, we have this special smartphone for $200, right? What is it going to do? And then again, if you want to compare like two different smartphones, like an Android and an iPhone, what criteria might be used to compare those two different devices? How could you, kind of say which one is better? All right. And then the last one is to kind of brainstorm. Uh, as you look around your house, anything that's been manufactured is it would have had constraints and criteria in the design. So if you guys can elaborate and share, pick four things in your house that would have had a design process that had constraints and criteria. And then the last part of this is so pick one of those four items, just one of them, and then we'll do that same process. What could have been three constraints for that object? What does it have to do? Or features it has to have? And then same question we've been asking. And then what would be three criteria that that same device could have that would, again, if you compare different, different models of that device, different whatever you want to pick in your house, how would you compare them to see which one is better? Again, what makes a high price version of that product versus a low price version of that product? What are the criteria that differentiates them? That's going to be it, guys. This is due on Friday, the 27th. But again, I'd shoot to turn it in today. If you want to work with a partner, that's perfectly fine. You guys can share it. It is good to talk about things and kind of agree if things are criteria or constraints. They are easy to have uh, to get those two ideas confused. That's it. Have a good day. I'll be back tomorrow. I did have a negative COVID test, so we are all good. See, bye, guys.